Welcome to The Next Decision, the show about the choices revenue leaders make when markets shift, growth gets challenging, and the old playbooks don't work quite as well as they used to. I'm Mike Swainey, president at Decision Counsel. Today I'm joined by my friend Aaron Ballew, founder of Small Table Advisory. And if there were actually a world's most interesting man, Aaron, I think it might be you. You're an electrical engineering PhD, a two-time CMO. You've worked across startups and private equity portfolio companies, in and out of telecom. I mean, just sort of the gamut. But today, what I'm super interested in talking with you about as we kind of reconnect here is your latest adventure with Small Table Advisory. And as you and I were talking before the show and when we prepped, you had kind of described it as kind of a closed door session for leaders and kind of a place where they can confront some of the real issues that don't always get surfaced in public meetings, kind of coming at it from a place of experience and empathy. And I love how you phrase that. So we'll talk a little bit about AI and kind of the cult behavior that sometimes follows that, and then kind of the risk of AI kind of pulling everybody into the mediocre middle. So that I think really tees up nicely what it is that you're doing and what I'm excited to talk about today. So having those conversations in the back room, sometimes at the small table. So Aaron, welcome to The Next Decision. It is great to see you today, my friend.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
So, talk a little bit about how you got to Small Table Advisory. I know the story, but I know folks that are listening might not understand your experience from PhD through CMO, a couple of exits. Talk about how you got to Small Table Advisory and what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. I went out on my own. I lived a corporate life and did it what I thought was the right way. As you work your way up, you get promoted, you take opportunities when opportunity knocks, and I had a wonderful experience working my way up from less than an engineer one. I was like an associate engineer, and more recently, chief marketing officer. Um, and at some point in my life, my grandma had told me there's nothing like eating an apple off your own tree. And I had never actually done that, getting a W-2 from from all these corporations. So I decided to try something on my own. And it gives me the ability to scope my work to the things that I think I'm actually really good at and that I really enjoy, um, and none of the other parts. So that's how I got to Small Table. You asked about some really early stage stuff like PhD and all that, and it's true. I was an aspiring engineer and a teacher. I thought I'd go into academia, professor. Life is funny that way. Like who knows what your life is going to be when you're 17 and you're signing up for a thing called a major. I happen to be decent at math. That's that positive feedback loop of like, oh, if you're decent at math, take more math. And that happened. But like everybody, there are a lot of things that interest me and inspire me. And those include art and music and comedy and culture and working on cars. It's not all computer science and electrical engineering. It's field. Although I love that too. I do love math. It's very beautiful. It's intriguing. So at some point in my engineering career, I think I was managing a small team of engineers at 14 engineers at the time, and I had an opportunity to go to technical marketing and kind of translate the technical, gizmos into why anyone should care. And having, been sort of on the teaching track, I had a little bit of comfort with the idea of trying to teach, trying to translate things in a way that would be more meaningful to people. So that turned into a technical marketing product marketing job. Kind of continued from there. And marketing was a great pivot for me. It's an interesting profession that as an engineer, I didn't really appreciate from the outside. I called stuff marketing fluff. I thought it was the arts and crafts department. But then once I was inside, I realized, wow, there's actually a lot of professions in here. There's like a small finance department here. There's a small information systems department here. There's obviously the creative side. There's also a lot of very strategic sort of project orchestration going on. So there's so many, professions within marketing. It's giving me a lot to learn from, a lot to grow from within like this. And now, doing my own thing and trying to help people make sense of that, particularly for people who are outside of market. I work with a lot of CEOs who are self-described, founders, engineers, product people, but they'll say, I'm not a marketer. And so that's great. That's a great opportunity for me to help fill in that gap.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, from folks who have backgrounds that are dissimilar from perhaps the traditional, what we might consider the traditional marketing path. And what's so interesting about what you're doing now at Small Table Advisory is that phrase, kind of the small table. I feel like it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's doing a lot of the work in a really good way. And I promise we're not going to go like full internet backrooms, which by the way is fantastic flick if you haven't seen it yet. But understanding that small table, the room kind of behind the room where the decisions get made. And I think that's where honest discussions happen. It's interesting that even in today's day and age, that still is a big part of how decisions and how promotions and futures and contracts get decided. But talk to me a little bit about that, about the small table. Like, what does that mean to you? And kind of, why do so many really important decisions still happen in those closed door conversation or conversational moments? Sometimes they happen organically and sometimes they're planned.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd probably take it even further than saying what's a big part of it. I think it's really where all the decisions are made, or all the real decisions are made. And maybe there's some looseness in the word real decisions. There are definitely decisions that are made in a forum. Um, I think it's like, the bigger the audience, the less tolerance for risk there is. There are a lot of questions for which you're not sure what the answer is, right? And when you're a C-level executive or a prominent leader, of vice president or something like that, you're trying to balance a lot of priorities. You're not just trying to make the decision. You're also trying to keep the team motivated, keep them, make sure they're still believers. They don't want to see you faltering, or at least you think you don't want them to see you faltering. Actually, if you ask real people who work within your team, they may actually really appreciate seeing imperfection, seeing openness and vulnerability. But that's a separate issue, right? But so many leaders try to maintain a sort of, this projection of certainty of conviction, because they have seen what happens when people spin, and they're worried, like, if the boss doesn't know what to do, then I sure don't know what to do. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I should clean up my
And,
resume.
and is that kind of why they sort of need that place to maybe say what no one will say out loud? Or is it that vulnerability piece of it?
Yeah, yeah, they have to have an opportunity to wrestle with ideas for which they don't know the answer, right? So by the time you get to the all hands, the decisions are pretty much made, and you're rolling out, you're cascading the decision. You're saying, we've decided to do this. We're launching this product, and it's going to be live by November 1st. And it's a huge opportunity, and we're all excited for the opportunity. But actually, how did that announcement come to pass? Well, there was a small table, a small number of people in a small room, or a small Zoom bridge. And they were wrestling with the possibilities, right? That, should we stay committed to feature A or product A that got us here? Or should we enter into this adjacent category, this new product? And anytime there are trade-offs to be made, things that don't feel good, things that you wish you didn't have to say no to,
Yeah.
that's when you have to move it to this smaller forum, which is a safer forum. Because when you go out in public, at least most leaders feel they need to be more certain. They have to be able to provide this projection of stability. But that's not what's really happening behind the scenes, right? To get to that point, it's very unstable, right? There are trade-offs. If we want to go into feature B, we might not win. We might not win. We may not have the pedigree, the skills, the resources, the time. We may be late. And if we try it, we may sacrifice development on feature A, the thing that got us here. Sales is depending on it. Customers were asking for it, and we have to trade that off. Well, that's a scary thing. Or we say, let's redouble our commitment to feature A, to the focus, that got us here. But we're going to miss potentially the window for feature B that takes us off strategy. It's by people saying, hey, where's your new exciting thing? When are you going to say something about feature B? So those are scary conversations. You have to be in, and like CEOs and CFOs and all those people, they're human beings, right? They're all of us who just are a few years older, maybe, and they got into that room, and they're wrestling with uncertainty, and you might be wrong. You might have to be able to say, well, I don't know yet. It's a very different tenor than when you get to the staff meeting or the all hands, and you're projecting this confidence that this is the right way to go. I believe this is what we should be doing.
Yeah, I like that because it gets to that human truth, right? That you mentioned that, yeah, they're human beings as well with fears and aspirations and goals and pressures and all of that that doesn't always come to the forefront. I think a lot of leaders recognize that, but they might not always say that out loud. I think that then having that space and being able to be candid and have that kind of moment of private truth, I think is super important. I think, you know, where that official meeting happens, the all hands, I think that decision gets presented to your point to your point, but that decision was probably made at a smaller table. So thinking about that, what did you learn, in your career trajectory, and in particular as a revenue leader, as a growth leader, even as a CMO, about the difference between that public alignment and that private moment or that private truth?
Well, I mean, there are certain things like we just kind of riffed on an idea of like product A product versus product Z, but like these behind the scenes conversations are sometimes they're about people, right? Like just take it to the most sensitive possible place. And the reason it's called small table is I actually had a CEO once who hired me. Said, "Hey, if I hired you, in this case, you're going to be the first C-level employee we've had, other than, and I've got a great team of leaders. They help me run the business. They're smart. But you are going to be invited to the small table where it's a really hard, and these are about funding, company strategy, people, um, things that affect a lot of people. So, talent is an example. When I say talent, it kind of conjures up ideas of, well, maybe a manager and HR person or talking about the performance of a staff management. Obviously that happens, but that's not what I'm actually talking about. Like real conversations that happen at C level might be the CEO and the C something else talk about a third person that's not in the room. And they go, this person is great, but I'm not sure they're the right person for us going forward. I'm not, it's not like they're bad at their job, but they have a certain mix of skills that got us here, but they don't have the right mix of skills to get us there. And so we might need to contemplate changing that person out of us. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a incredibly sensitive kind of conversation that only happens, at the small table and even a subset of the C-suite. So,
And that's interesting because you now, I think, are beginning to, what I'm wondering is what makes somebody useful in that at that small table. That is it conviction or courage? Is it expertise? Is it the ability to say something hard that a leader would understand or respond to? Like, what if you've got somebody who's been invited to the small table for the first time, what might be some advice that you would give them to make themselves indispensable in that moment?
yeah. Well, it's definitely not conviction. I would say it's not conviction. In fact, conviction is really the opposite. That's when you go on stage, you should present conviction. I've even gotten that advice before from leaders where, we go into a board meeting and, I went in just because of my personality with this very sort of engineer techie guy, like the balance, it's more complicated than that. You have to consider this and consider that. And some of the advice I got afterward was everyone understands that it's more complicated than that, but in that meeting, you have to project conviction. That was the advice I got. I'm not sure it's perfect in all situations, but that's more the tone and tenor of being on stage, of presenting your point of view. People are certainly smart enough to appreciate that there's a little bit of nuance here and there, but it's not a lot of nuance. Like having that certainty is really important. So the small table environment is going in the other direction on the spectrum. Because it's a smaller environment with very chosen counterparts, it's a safer environment to have less conviction, right? To tolerate more risk. So that's where, the dangerous ideas should be surfaced.
Love it. Before we move on to the next section, I think, which I think we can dig in now on AI. I wanted to just kind of note for the record, when we think about AI, we think about all the things that it can do. And it is certainly true that AI can help us in our decision making by flooding either the large or the small table, honestly, with more options, more content, more stuff. But I think because AI can do all of that and it helps to provide leaders with more input to make their decisions, I wonder if now there's more noise and there is more that's happening that makes the small table maybe even more critical. Because I think that having more options, more output, more stuff doesn't always lead to, to better judgment. I think that's where the small table really comes in. And I talked about this kind of before the show. You and I think, both agree that we're AI adopters and optimists, but I don't think either of us would sign up to be AI cultists by any means. So that is just willingly handing over the most important decisions to the AI overlords. And if you're listening, AI overlords, I love you, I respect you. Please think of me well when you take over the world. But this conversation can kind of get pretty binary. Either it is or it is not. Either it's going to solve everything, or AI is going to ruin everything. And my sense is that that's too simple of how we should be looking at this. I do feel, though, that AI is creating a sea of sameness, maybe more so than we used to talk about as creative leaders, where it kind of pulls everybody toward the safe middle, which honestly is what AI is kind of set up to do. So, you've described yourself as an AI optimist, but not a cultist. And what does that distinction mean to you? And as leaders think about the kind of the breadth of information they now have at their fingertips, how really does that distinction impact the conversations at the small table?
Well, okay, there's a lot in there. It's a
I
great,
know there's a lot.
a great series of questions. Let me start with AI. So, first of all, I'm an enthusiast, right? I use it every day. I have an OpenClaw agent. I have automated tasks and workflows. It's very powerful. I've created an agent for like my kids to use, and it helps them with homework. And that's OpenClaw. I've got Claude Cowork running in a different system. I mean, it's really been valuable to me, especially as a business owner, so for my infrastructure. Created my website also. Um, when you don't understand a thing very well, you're starting to understand it. Like there's sort of a curve of understanding where, when you don't understand it very well, your confidence in how well you understand it can be quite high. This is common in a lot. You start to bleed into this thing I would just vaguely call futurism. Futurism, right? It's almost science fiction. Like you're imagining all the things it could be. And that's very inspiring, very energizing. I feel that too. Then go do it. Go do it. Go actually, fingers on keyboard, not just opening up a tab in Claude or ChatGPT, but install a desktop client, Codex or Cowork, or try OpenClaw or Hermes, whatever these ones, the one that you would like to try. But actually try, beyond just using it as a search engine, try to create something. Try to delegate a task to it. Just try it. And if you actually try, you will already have jumped across this major milestone between 80% of AI users and 20% of AI users. You'll be in the 20th street. Most people are using it as a fabulous search engine and as a sort of text thought synthesis engine where you talk to it, it responds, and it's very real time. It's responding directly to your prompt. Very few people are actually delegating work to it and using agentic AI, if you'll forgive me.
Yep.
The term of art. Very few people are doing that. It seems like everybody is doing that if you look at LinkedIn or something, but they're not. It's very rare. And part of my daily work is not just go-to-market advisory, but it's career coaching. And a lot of people are going into interviews, right? And they feel like an AI imposter. They know AI questions are going to come up, and they're basically BSing their way through because they've used Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, like basically as a great search engine. But the questions they're being asked about by these tech companies aren't really those. They're looking for agentic experience. Have you actually set up a gem in Gemini or Claude MD or in OpenClaw and agents.md? You understand, like once you actually do it and you force yourself not to become this incredible engineer now. I mean, obviously software developers, it's like really quick and easy. They get GitHub, they get APIs, they understand that stuff. They understand tokens. And for a lot of people, we just don't. But once you try it, it's not such a labyrinth. You build this intuition about tokens and APIs and OAuth, or popping a browser window to share your login, like the different ways to get access to stuff, which means also the different obstacles to overcome to make things happen. And when you don't actually try to do it, you get the luxury of futurism. You assume there's a solution, but you don't have to live through actually achieving it, right? And I think that crossing that milestone, if anybody would just install it, give it access to your laptop within reason, within the boundaries of your security, guardrails or whatever company you work for, and just try to delegate any task to an AI. You will you will feel so like enriched by that. You'll feel so much more confident by that, even though you're not like a mega power user, the top 1% of AI users, but you will be in the top 20%. And you'll be able to go into that conversation, whether it's interviews or at work or whatever, and you'll sound like you know what you're talking about because you actually do. And there's so many aspects of life where you can instantly tell when someone is having the same conversation or they're kind of an imposter, right? And the reason a lot of people feel like an imposter is because you're a rational person and you're correctly identifying a little bit of a gap that's intimidating, but it's actually not as big a leap as you fear, right? I mean, it sounds really sophisticated AI, this and that, but all these companies, all the overlords, as you described, like they're actually doing a really good job of making these things easy to onboard to. So um, by knowing more, it actually reduces your futurism, right? It actually reduces your over exuberance because you start to understand, well, it's not that easy to get an AI to an agent to, do a thing next week. You start to learn about scheduling tasks, about cron jobs and things like that. You start to see, oh, actually, this one does have that built in. It understands to schedule a cron job. If I say, remind me, oh, this one doesn't yet. I have to set that up first as a skill or something. It's really powerful. So, if there's any sort of encouragement that might come out of anyone listening to this, it's that. It's not as far out of your reach as you might think. There's no reason to feel like an imposter. Just try it. And it'll just really open up the world to you and also reduce the universe a little bit. That makes sense? Open up the world, but reduce the universe, that over exuberance, that easy. Because there are definitely people making big decisions like, let's just fire half the company and replace it with AI. I bet most of them have not actually tried to do something.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think, when we make this practical for, for a marketer who's using it for content, they're probably using generative, but to your point, they're probably not setting up entire workflows. Although I know some marketers who are,
Yeah, absolutely.
but yeah, but if you're a CMO or I'm a CMO, a founder, a growth leader who is trying to use it, is there anything that they should do or should do differently? For example, you've provided some sage advice in terms of jumping in and trying to create those gems or create those workflows. Anything else, or guardrails, or who might need to be involved to determine, is that a small table conversation that you've had about how organizations are using AI or how marketing teams are using it? Is that a small table conversation, or are you seeing that more out in the open and more in the as a public facing, part of the conversation?
Another great question. I think it's actually happening in both kind of strata. It's both small table and also large. Um, there's slightly different angles on the conversation. Out in the open, it's everyone needs to try, everyone needs to get, start burning tokens, basically. Um, Probably not enough clarity for them about burning those tokens toward what end, right? So I talk to a lot of companies who say in this kind of sheepish way, well, we got everyone licenses, but we're not doing great at working them into the business processes yet. It's like some version of that. And that's okay. That's natural. Like there's clearly this big pressure, this feeling of pressure, like we need to be doing AI or we'll fall behind. But there has always been a really important aspect of changing something, which is change management. And people need to understand, like, hold on, what role does this play in my job? Does this actually help me? Is this required of me? And just giving them an account, uh, risks basically going by the wayside, like so much SaaS has gone by the wayside. You mentioned earlier something about like the private, what was it, kind of public agreement and alignment, but private differences. I don't remember how you exactly said it, but that's a really common thing with SaaS, right? You buy people some software, it's not just AI, but any SaaS. And out in public, they go, "Oh, thank you, it's great, we've got this tool. Oh, we had this at my last companies." And then once everyone's done with that rollout, they go, "I'm never using this. I don't need it for machine intelligence." Well, I'm not updating that, which is kind of like sabotage, really. This is a really common thing. It takes a little bit, it means they're not bought in, right? They don't believe in the value. So AI has the same obligation, I think. There should be value there. And that's more what happens, I think, behind the scenes is, okay, we're burning a lot of tokens, but I'm not seeing return on this investment. This is expensive. And, what should we actually ask people to do? In fact, sometimes when they use AI, I don't like it. I wish they wouldn't. So that's where it kind of bubbles up behind the scenes is, I wouldn't say regret, but it's like coming to terms with realism, with reality. It's easy to say, go, 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 buy it, sign up, roll it out. That part's easy. Once it's done, though, and you have to actually reap some reward from it, then reality starts to set in. We start talking about, okay, what do we do now? And so there are many companies out there who are they don't necessarily walk it back because AI brings a lot of value. It really does. But they might streamline, like kind of narrow down the scope of who's actually using it at what level.
Yeah, and I think that, where if I go back to the start and my theory that, there's AI that's providing and helping us with providing all these inputs, all this information, all this access to tools and dashboards. You kind of put your finger on that, whether it's being used appropriately to solve real business challenges. And I think what I heard you say there, Aaron, a little bit was kind of starting with your objectives. What are you trying to get out of the experience, the investment in these tools? And if it's not helping make decisions easier for leaders, then it certainly needs to be positioned in such a way that it does. And I think until such time, the small table still ends up being, a really important part of every executive's acumen. And so, I guess as we kind of pivot toward our close, you know, where leaders have this information, they have teams that are working through AI tools and processing data at a clip that would have been very, very difficult for individuals and teams to do on their own without AI just a few years ago. What is it that, why is it still so hard for them to make that right decision? And I guess a little bit further on that, how do they know when they're solving the right or maybe sometimes the wrong problem? Or maybe AI has led them to a sea of sameness, or maybe AI has helped them do this but not that. But I guess, in a nutshell, how do they know how to make sense of all those inputs and still come up with the right decision, which is kind of what this show's all about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, r- Remind me to speak of the sea of sameness because I love that expression. So
Okay.
it's I think now I realize you when you mentioned I think the mediocre middle a moment ago. It's called to summarize. Um,
I conflated two things that are similar in my mind, but probably different in yours.
well,
So yeah.
why don't we just dive into that for a moment?
Yeah.
Because it's such an interesting turn of phrase. The way um, the mediocre middle. Okay. Sometimes the mediocre middle is used in the context of the idea of consensus. It's like trying to please too many people. I think that's everyone understands that phenomenon. The consensus is not necessarily the correct. But let me just take a little different direction on mediocreness or mediocrity and sameness. So there are frameworks for how to do a thing. There are standards of practice for how to do it. Most of those actually started out as something like a hack, right? Some clever hack, SEO, maybe somebody invented email drips at some point, right? Like it was a new thing. Could be AI stuff. It could be search bidding strategies. So, or social media. There are these hacks that people start to pick up on and people learn about it and it grows. And that hack is no longer a hack anymore. It was very novel, but now it's known by sort of the best of the best, the select few. And it starts getting called a best practice. Well, then people learn what the best practice is. And more people use the best practice to where it starts to become the standard of practice, right? And it's no longer a hack. It's no longer going to get you ahead, right? So everybody has access to the same tools, and especially because of AI, everyone has access to the AI, but also the tools that can be, derived from it. So this is actually, I think, the normal march of time, the normal march of like progress and a profession continuing to sort of mature. Um, there are going to be those who are the creators who, like from first principles, have a spark of inspiration, a spark of an idea, and they produce this tack, right, that gets sort of outsized results, and then it will grow and become best practice and standards of practice. I guess what I would suggest is that's normal. Don't settle for adopting standards of practice, because I would say that is settling. That's settling. Where someone comes and talks to me about, I do it this way, this is the standard, I follow this methodology. I'm not as excited about that as someone who has gone back to first principles and understands kind of the foundation of like, what is this world we're trying to model through these processes, through these techniques and methods and data, whatever, and have found some avenue to experiment, to try something. That excites me more to find out, right? And maybe that can become the next hack that becomes best practice, because standard practice. So some aspect of that is speed. Move, try it, get in there, right? Give yourself the opportunity to have that spark of inspiration, because if you're waiting for standards, you will only ever be standards.
I love that. Yeah, and that is, I think, at times where I feel like the breakdown occurs, especially if folks are leaning into heavily on that, and that's where I get to that sea of sameness idea, where folks are using AI to essentially replace what would have been normal human thought or normal human creative process of getting to a particular decision or outcome, and then as a result of that, it becomes muddled and a little bit muddy in the middle because, well, I don't have a lot of time. I'll just have AI kind of give me the 80/20, and I'll go from there. And so that I fear that is what a lot of folks are using it for, at least right now, and that's why that resonates so deeply with me, especially with how you were also kind of, I think, describing that particular situation.
80/20 is a good way to put it. Like, I think it's amazing how quickly it gets you from 0 to 80.
Yeah.
Let's say you want to redesign the website, redesign the homepage, or you're coming up with the agenda for some big offsite, usually like simple things. Or maybe it's some big business thesis, some strategic, investment that needs to. It's amazing how quickly it gets you from 0 to 80%. And that 80% is not good enough by almost any professional standard. Like, if you, as a human not using AI, brought that, they would say, okay, you need to do another rep on this. You need to do a couple more reps. All right, it's not ready for publication. You do still have the responsibility to get the thing to whatever good enough is, right? This is ready to go public. This is ready to go live, or whatever. Because the people on the other side are the victims of your 80% good enough, right? And I've seen that repeatedly. So that it's great to rapidly mock things up, to conceptualize things, to get something to react to. But then the people and their craft and their experience come back in to get it to the real finish line. At least that seems to be the state of the art right now for
Yeah.
most
Agreed.
applications. I'm sure there are corner cases where it can do the whole thing, and maybe in the future this will change. Maybe it gets you to 95%. But right now, that seems to be the state.
Yeah, I think this idea is kind of bringing us to kind of the conclusion of our conversation today. I think, the next decision isn't always about adopting, a new tool or generating more content, but rather what is that next decision that a leader has to make to achieve a specific outcome. So I'll pose that question more directly to you, Aaron. We think about small table conversations and the like. In your opinion, what's the next decision? What's the most important decision that a leader or any leader has to make sure that their teams are having those conversations and that they're making the best decision that they can for their organization? What's the next thing, or what are the things that folks should be thinking about, if you were to give somebody advice at the small table today?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing the small table metaphor throughout our conversation. That's helpful. I think you want to judge the risk in the conversation relative to the venue, right? I think that's the first thing. And a lot of people do it sort of instinctively, but I think you can actually do it covertly and contemplate, like, the decision I need to make. What is the risk to the company? What is the risk to me? What is the risk to the people involved? Bring those people together where you feel comfortable. And I would say just bring like one rung bigger than that. Like give people enough benefit of the doubt that they can absorb a little bit more risk than you probably realize that, because then you get better ideas. Actually, the absence of certainty sometimes brings out the best thinking, the best ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the C-suite, when they get there, maybe they rose through the ranks, right? And they still feel like I'm Joe, the same Joe I've always been. I'm Sally, I'm the same Sally. But people do treat you a little different. They do. It just happens. There's this like balance of power or something. It's people start telling you, not everybody, a lot of people will start telling you how great your ideas are, whereas before they would have told you, you might want to rethink this. So inviting those people in, you have to create the environment, right? There's this push-pull against the risk versus the safety, but you as a leader can set that tone of what is safe. Challenge yourself to expand that rung just by one. You might get some better ideas. And then relative to your own ideas in terms of making better decisions, I think this is easier said within like early stage startups where people are so hands-on and close to the product, but it matters there and also in larger companies. Don't allow yourself to just become that like empty suit executive who just does performance reviews and approves other people's business, plans and things like that. Get hands-on and know what you're talking about, right? Try co-work, try to create a web page. You don't have to deploy it. Try to create a web page and deploy it, because it's so easy for you to go to the teams and demand that the web page or the website does this, looks like this, whatever. And it's your right, it's your prerogative. But now you have these tools, these AI tools, that vastly reduce the barrier to you producing a web page. Try it. Even if your title is CEO, try it. Go produce a web page this afternoon. Install Cowork and produce a web page. Deploy it live, right, to Netlify or wherever. And you'll have such an appreciation for what thought and work and what details go into it, and also what the AI could do and where it didn't do it as well. You'll improve all your decisions, because every system, every tool, every model, all the data, these are very imperfect reflections of reality. They're all subsamples, right? They're all samples. Everything that fills in the gap is your own intuition. It's your own experience. So enrich your own experience, enrich your own intuition.
I love it. And I think that is the perfect place to leave it for today. Aaron, thank you for joining us on The Next Decision. I love how and we could probably talk about this for hours, but I love how you connect, AI with judgment, with candor, and certainly to the kind of conversations that enable leaders and companies to make decisions that will actually improve their growth and create change management. So I love that connection of those kind of intertwined topics. And I think, at the end of the day, it's all still about the human, that human element piece of it that we talked about early on. I don't think that AI and its output will really ever supplant that human decision making, but it certainly can help us. So thanks everybody for listening today to The Next Decision, brought to you by the amazing people and the minds at Decision Counsel. We'll see you next time.